Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're joined by the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Waterways and Environment, Mr. Joshua Wycliffe. Sir, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's talk about something that caused a lot of scrutiny to the Ministry of Waterways and Environment recently, which is the Singatoka Iron Sands mining project. Recently, the media, of course, Parliament received a petition by some concerned citizens about the way in which the mining is being done and whether or not it is sustainable to the environment in that area. So talk to us about this mining project. It was, of course, sanctioned by the Ministry of Waterways and Environment.
All right. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for the opportunity for the Ministry of Waterways and Environment to be able to come here and also go for the record and be able to clarify on some key important facts around this whole issue. Let me just start it by saying that Fiji is a progressive nation and it's fast becoming, or has already become, a force to reckon with internationally on the global platform, both environmentally as well as economically. There are nations around the world that are watching us as far as the environment goes and how we protect, manage and preserve our environment. Having said that, we also have an economy that people are eyeing at. The department goes through several applications through the hundreds, and many of those applications for investments have to go through environment impact assessments. And so I can see the dynamic nature through which the department is put through and how we manage those applications, the proponents. And so eyes are on Fiji for the economic growth, at the same time the environmental protection. So it then becomes the responsibility of the government and the ministry as such to be able to manage them and work with the investors and of course the proponents to ensure that the environment is protected while we also make room for the business. Let me also set the record straight that there are two matters here which needed to be set right. So let me go on record. The Singatoka, the mining, magma mining that we're talking about, that was widely publicized, and the Singatoka River dredging are two separate matters. And what is happening is that probably because, and it's my view, that because the name Singatoka is tagged to it, then people tend to club them together. So what I'm thinking of doing today is to segregate the two matters and then unpack them and be able to provide you with the details of how it happened. So if we talk about the Magma Mines, the Magma Mines Limited, MML, applied for Environment Impact Assessment in the month of December 2014, and they were approved. The Environment Impact Assessment was approved in the year of October 2015. The studies, the EIA studies, were conducted by a Department of Environment approved and registered consultant called Doraranga Environment Consulting. And also let me set this right, that the MML do not have an approval for mining. They do not have a mining license. They have an exploratory license. They're approved to explore. So that's where the things are at. And then over a period of time, so when the studies were done, they were detailed, I understand, and this happened in 2014. So what had happened was that the area that they were going to be exploring was from the river mount closer to the Vanuatu area, village, closer to Watua Island, and coming up to the Korowua Island, totally as such. So, and also the exploratory area we were made aware of, and they cannot explore in protected areas, environment protected areas. So it was outside those areas, and it was based on what was meant to happen, and the Department of Environment closely watches. And if there is any breach or anything that happens differently to what was approved years ago, we still have an up-to-date watch over what's happening and immediately there would be action taken, and that action could even include doing a prohibition notice or a stop work notice. So it will be brought under control if there is anything that is against what was originally approved. And I understand the studies that were done those days before the approval was given included biological impacts like aquatic ecology and mangrove ecosystems, river mouth, estuary studies, and also studies impacts on terrestrial flora and fauna. All that was done clearly before an approval was done. There was also potential fisheries impact assessment done, I'm told, and also potential public health and environmental impact studies that were done. So according to my information, right now it's at a prospecting stage, not at a mining stage. And so none of this prospecting is happening within the within the environmentally protected area. So it's within the limit that it should happen. So
if I can interject
Sure.
for a moment here. So you're saying, I mean, you made it very clear the distinction between an exploratory license and a mining license. Why do you feel that that is an important distinction for people to understand? What happens in either of those?
exploratory, in my opinion, and from what I understand, exploratory process does not include a wider mining process, which is a much larger process. At an exploratory stage, there's minimal or no impact to the environment. It's drilling down and exploring what's in there underneath. Mining will be a much larger scale. It will be at a much larger scale where they'll go deeper into basically a lot more process will happen, including digging and dredging and all those things that will happen to be able to get the magnetite out from there.
Again, just to clarify, during the exploratory processes that are currently underway, is there any profiteering that is being done by Magma Mines Limited?
To the best of my knowledge, no. I would not. I'm not aware of any profiteering happening there. But generally speaking, you explore to see if there will be profits. It's more like a due diligence of a technical due diligence of what's underneath and whether it'll be feasible.
Right. We'll carry on the conversation when we come back from our next break. Stay with us.
So, sir, in the previous segment, we looked at this distinction between explorative mining and also the mining licenses that would be looked at later on for Magma Mines Limited. You also said that there's a very important thing that you needed to clarify between the dredging works and also the mining works. Now, let's look into the dredging works that's going on.
Sure. These are two different locations. The dredging work was mostly done because the communities wanted that, because it was to avoid flooding. The Ministry of Waterways and Environment doesn't go around mucking with rivers unless it's an emergency situation, unless it's going to flood a community. Some time back I was informed that a river, when it got flooded, it actually resulted in a farm losing 50,000 chickens. That's a huge impact. Loss to property, loss to lives, injuries to communities, and so many other things. So we will step in and do dredging or support dredging when there is a need by the community, and in this instance there was. So we had to maintain a clear passage through the river channel in Singatoka estuary and minimize the frequency of flooding of the communities. So what we had to do was, when I say we, I'm talking about going back to the year 2013 when it was undertaken by the Ministry of Primary Industry. When at that stage there was no Ministry of Waterways and Environment together combined, and so there was a unit, a division within the ministry, then Ministry of Primary Industries, called LORAM, which was the Land and Water Resource Management Unit. And so they applied for an EIA in 2013, and in the same year they got the EIA approved with conditions. And then as the work proceeded and progressed, when in 2017, when the Ministry of Waterways was established, the work got transitioned to the then Ministry of Waterways. And the contractor started doing the job, and then over a period of time, what happened was, as they were nearing completion, again, it was the communities were consulted clearly as a part of the EIA process. They wanted it, and the land there was also a land that the community had agreed for the spoils or the silt to be put. It was a dump site. It was they call it a dump site for the silts to be put in place. So it was clearly agreed, and so they put. In the meanwhile, during one of the cyclones, what had happened was some of the dredging equipment drifted, and that caused the damage as well. So when complaints were raised in 2018 to the Department of Environment, the Department of Environment immediately stepped in and put a stop work, which meant that the Ministry of Waterways couldn't proceed, or the contractor couldn't proceed, until all those issues were rectified and taken care of. So what had happened was, in some quarters of the social media I come to know that that because this issue in the last few weeks have come up, the department has since clamped down on the prohibition notice, which is untrue. The truth is that we had done a prohibition notice, and I was the permanent secretary at that stage in 2018. So then the contractor rectified some of those issues, and also they were able to do most of it, except the clearing of the sediments in the stockpile, at the stockpile dump site. And the reason being, the communities are working with the Ministry of Lands to have the paperwork that is necessary to be done, and once that's done, the community would be able to sell the stockpile or the sediments that they have. So naturally, some of these sediments have salinity content in it, and that has had impact on the environment and the vegetation there. The community, we are working with the community now to be able to fast track whatever the paperwork they want. The paperwork from our end is all done, so they will have to work with Ministry of with Lands and being able to have that secure. Once they're secure, they would sell it. But the conditions, one of the conditions the Director of Environment has placed is that this be rehabilitated, and she's given a timeline of 3 months from the date of the stockpile being cleared. And I need to be very clear that the reason that rehabilitation cannot take place for that stockpile dump site is that there is that stockpile there. Once that's cleared, then the rehabilitation can take place, and the department will ensure that that condition is met by all means. So rehabilitation will take place. Apart from that, damages, if there are any financial damages, the contractor has, the ministry has facilitated discussions with the contractor and the community, and in terms of financial settlement between them, the contractor and the community, and that has happened as well. So all that is now left with that issue is that the stockpile needs to be removed, and whoever wants to sell that, that's their issue. Once it's cleared, we've got 3 months to be able to rehabilitate the whole place.
So if you can go back to some of the things that were mentioned, when did the ministry first become aware that there were certain unforeseen impacts taking place?
To the best of my knowledge, the work was transitioned to the Ministry of Waterways, the then Ministry of Waterways, in 2017, and in 2018 was when, mid-2018 is when the department became aware of issues through complaints and from the community and others.
And you said that once the ministry was made aware, an immediate prohibition notice was issued.
Served, yes.
So the difference between, because the ministry can only issue a prohibition notice, but what about compliance? What does the ministry then do to ensure that it's being complied with?
Sure. And this is not just with this particular project. Any project around Fiji, when it comes to our notice, we issue a prohibition immediately. And what we do is we follow up with inspectors going to the site to make sure whether this is being complied with. If it is not complied with, we, again, of course, apart from writing to them, putting it in writing and verbally notifying them, we then prepare case files. The department now has trained prosecutors, at least 4 prosecutors, who are now trained by the DPP, who can then prepare case files and then escalate it and take people to court. And so we have a legal framework, and the law is applied. And if compliance is again breached and there is no, the prohibition notice is not followed, then we escalate it, we prepare a case file, take the party to court, and convict them from our end, try to get the conviction. So we do that in stages, documented stages that we take place.
We'll let you carry on with that, and we'll talk about some of those stages when we come back from our next break. Stay with us.
So, sir, let's now look at something that would be of interest, not just to the residents of that particular area, but also to the nation as well. A lot of times you happen to have people questioning and trying to figure out what are the obligations, what is the ministry doing, what is the relevant department doing, but what about the obligations on the miners and the company that is involved, the obligations to the community, to the environmental impact assessments, and also all the other connotations that it has?
It's actually very refreshing to be able to answer that question, because most of the times the department is at the receiving end as to why this is taking this long, why the approvals are taking this long, and that we've had to constantly front up to those questions. And this is a good opportunity to be able to explain actually how behind the scenes things happen. The Environment Management Act of 2005 is a very comprehensive, robust instrument to manage and protect anything that is on the land. I'm talking about environmental protection, the land, water, or the air. So if there is a mining or a developer or any operation, any activity on the land, air, or water that would have impact environmentally, then the first and foremost thing that needs to happen is they should have an environmental screening done at the department. So the screening is a not so difficult, ardent process. It's quite a simple procedure, but they need to come into the department, get the screening application done. A trained officer then goes on site, screens the project as against the ground reality, and comes back and prepares a screening report. And then the director of the department goes through the screening report, and if she wants further, or she or he wants further information, then the director is able to send the officer back or call in the proponent, have whatever clarifications to be made, and then a determination is made as to whether an EIA report needs to be prepared or submitted, or there isn't, or perhaps something smaller, easier. So the department carefully watches, looks at what is ground reality, compares it to what is being proposed, and these are trained people, and the Environment Impact Assessment Unit put together has over 60, 70 years of experience, combined staff experience, then added to the director, it's over 80 years. So it's a strong unit, and it's got good capacity, well trained and well groomed, and some of these staff are from who are trained not just in Fiji but also abroad. So they have a rounded knowledge when they do the screening process. They're aware of it. And I have people who've been exposed internationally and locally to these processes. For instance, the director we have is formerly a State Department of the United States employee with 10 years of environmental specialization experience. So we have full confidence in a team that is able to look at the ground reality, make a decision. Once they've done that, there's a series of things that they have to do. Collect your desk work in terms of research of that area. Some of the projects even do aerial surveys. They do hydrological surveys. They go on the ground. So there's both, like your PhD thesis, you do both desk work as well as field work, collect that information, put together, and these are done by department registered consultants. And there's a protocol for these consultants. There's a code of conduct for these consultants. They strictly follow by that. If they don't, then the department takes action on these consultants. So then they bring this report, but before they bring this report, they also have community consultation. This is something that directly answers the question that you've asked, where They go to the communities have the opportunity to raise their concerns or support it, or if they have doubts to clarify, at that stage they do it. Then the project is also advertised on the newspaper saying that there is a community consultation, so people are aware in public, and the public is aware that this is happening. I mean, there are contentious projects that communities sometimes do not want. They have the opportunity to be heard at that stage. And if there is enough sufficient evidence, both through the desktop fieldwork and the community consultation, that would be detrimental to the environment or to the social, it will have social impact, then the director has the ability to decline. And I'm aware of projects being turned down. And then what happens is, if the proponent still does not agree, then they have the opportunity to take the department to the tribunal. So I'm quite confident of the process in place and the team that does a great job at the environment unit.
So sometimes there are instances where even when you dot all the I's and you cross off all the T's, everything is met. But when it's implemented, there's also the possibility of some things going awry, and then that's when you have people coming up, the community, those who are concerned, those who are involved, saying that, look, we have issues and concerns that we'd like to raise, but then because of the bureaucracy of the particular processes, they might get stonewalled and say, look, we've already did the assessment, we've already had the consultations, and we're going to carry through, we're just going to barge on. What do you do in instances like that?
Absolutely right. I mean, you just hit the nail. This is where a lot of this conflicts come from. There is an EIA that's approved, and sometimes you wait for months before the EIA approval you are able to get the EIA approval. So you kind of heave a sigh of relief. Oh, now I got it. I'll just go run away with the project. And then what you do is, I mean, this is so typical. I'll step back a little bit and still go a step backward. When you're through the process of EIAs, what happens is, and this we've faced time and time and again, and I'm informed by the department, that every, let's say, 20 to 30%, if not 40% sometimes, of the applications that land at our desks, front desk, are incomplete. Probably, and this is my view again, because the proponent wants to push things fast, because these are investors pushing them and pressurizing them. I put my money down, where are the approvals? So then what happens is the consultant has to get it fast, quick, and put it in, and so paperwork is missing. So the department again is in a catch-22 situation. So they say, look, we can't accept it unless you've done it. So they go back and do it, back and forth. So finally, they meet all the requirements, and that's when they're able to assess it, and the department provides the approval. Then, like I said, they heave a sigh of relief, go and start with the project, and they want to get it done. And then there are instances when proponents look for shortcuts, and that's where the issue of what you've said comes. Or the consultant who's done it is human, the officer who's processed it is also human. So there could be some gaps or errors, which is rare, but it still does happen. And then what has, and I was telling a few minutes ago before we start the program, there are times we come across issues that weren't issues 10 years ago, or for an EIA that was approved in 2013, like we saw now. So then the department is matching it against current environmental standards, both globally and nationally. And so when they come across the issues, thankfully, the Environment Management Act has a provision which allows the director of the department to be able to assess today's situation as against what was approved, and has the ability and the power through the Act to be able to defer the conditions of approval previously given, or even stop the work and say, look, that cannot go ahead until you do this. So, but like I said, then it becomes a conflict between the department and the proponent who has spent money, who spent time to have the approval. Then it gets escalated to the permanent secretary or the minister. And then we step in and work with the department and the proponent and resolve the issue.
We'll talk about more issues when we come back from our next break. Stay with us. So in the previous segments, you mentioned how there's a robust procedure that's set in place. And a part of that procedure is to consult with the community as well. But I'd just like to know how much weight that holds. Let's say, for example, a mining company holds the consultation. They fulfilled all of their obligations. And during that consultation, there's really no agreement. There's a lot of people that are, they don't see an issue with the project being done. There are some members of the community that are not so happy about it. So how does that sort of a situation get resolved? And what qualifies as a go-ahead?
Thank you. The procedure, like I said, is very clear. The communities do have their obligations under this. During the consultations, sometimes the consultations, depending on what the department wants, could run into 2 or 3 sessions separately and during different times. And so the communities do have an obligation towards this process because it's their community that will be impacted. And it's not just mining, it's about any development. Recently we've had resorts, major ones in the West, with one of them now under court process. Judicial process. See, the thing is, when there is a development that happens around a community, there are a lot of potential social impact issues, environmental impact issues, and health impact issues. And there are also competition, economic issues. So when there's a development that happens in a community, one of those things the community needs to keep an eye on is how does it impact them in all those 3 areas that I've mentioned: health, economy, environment, and of course social. So would this business positively impact the environment? Is it going to take away the crabs, for instance? Is it going to take away the turtles? And that versus what kind of job opportunities are they going to? Are they willing to compromise on any of those? How will it impact their social lives? I'm just giving a hypothetical example. There could be 2 developments coming. There will always be competitors in that area. Let's say 2 or 3 other resorts, and then there's a new resort coming in. The 2 or 3 other resorts could try and block them because that's competition. And then this newcomer could also try to play dirty by paying more salaries to the community people. So obviously tending to migrate, pull people from the existing, because the community number of people is limited, so you play for the same workforce within 2 or 3 businesses. The community should be aware of all of that. And then their lifestyle could change drastically because there's another business coming in there, another development, or a mining project that comes in there. So the community's obligation is to give a joint consent. And to my understanding, it's 60% of the community should consent to it before project goes ahead. And if it is not, we won't. However, I can also say that the department has been going even more stricter recently with hydro project approval, the process that came in. The department took pains to even go to the smallest pocket of resistance, consult them. And if that issue from the smallest pocket of resistance, or I wouldn't even like to call it resistance, smallest pocket of concern comes, then the department takes notice of that as against the broader picture. And if that will impact the others, then they pull the other community members and tell them, look, you haven't considered this, so why don't you look at this as well? And then as a whole, treat it, and even we do not want to ignore even the smallest pocket of concern, and we handle that.
And that becomes especially important because sometimes the way that it gets reported by the media makes it seem like there's this big disconnect between what the community members wanted and what the Ministry of Environment and Waterways approved, right?
Exactly. And I think it's true. It's very true what you've said. And media has the great responsibility of reporting in a balanced way, balanced manner. Be it a small pocket of concern or a large community concern, hearing all sides and being able to provide the right information. And we rely on the media to support us in our awareness and education, raising awareness of these issues. You're very right. When it says that when the media slants the truth, even, put it like that. You don't have to be untruthful. You could slant the truth, and then the other side is left out. And so then the department is left with the responsibility of ensuring the communication reaches all pockets. So we thank the media that have so far, those who have kind of worked with the ministry and provided a balanced view on the whole thing, giving importance to all concerns from all sides.
In any project that is undertaken, of course, there's need for follow-ups to take place. You've mentioned that sometimes it can be a lengthy process from when approvals are given to when the project is underway and to what happens in between and during. What about after? So once a project has been given the get-go and it is underway, and what about follow-ups then? Who does the onus fall on?
Well, look, the onus of onus of compliance falls on the proponent. They have to comply, and the EIA comes with conditions. I've seen of some of the developers having 35, 38 conditions on their approval, huge, running into 2-3 pages. So the compliance goes on to them. However, the department wraps around the project called something called the Environment Management Committee, EMC. And you have all agencies from the ministry to other agencies, other regulatory authorities to being represented, including the community sitting on the... So everybody is on that committee, and the committee meets often, depending on the size of the project, and there are reports. And that is always made a condition on the approval. So if it doesn't meet, and if there are no reports, then the director of the department is able to step in and stop the work. So that is our reporting of how well they are following the laws and how well they are keeping up to what was required in terms of compliance. And if they don't, and if there are no reports to that effect, then the department is able to stop them.
And in terms of bringing about concerns to the table, bringing issues to light that members of the community, or maybe even the companies that are involved would like to talk about, would like to have looked at, what is the procedure? Is it as simple as just getting any petition out and having it signed, and then people have backed it up, and then that it comes up to the table, or is there a rigid process involved?
There's a structured process. We got an environmental hotline at the ministry, so it could start from there and could go through formal process of phone calls or petitions. Either way, there is a pathway, structured pathway. It comes to the directors to her knowledge. It could be through the minister, it could be through my office, it could be through the staff, it could be through anything from surveillance, competitors, neighbors, but it gets funneled onto the director's desk. And he or she then takes immediate action by sending the inspectors to the place and to see whether it's been complied with. And if it is not, then immediately a stop work is issued. And then, like I said, it's now on them, the onus is on them to prove that they haven't breached. Then they come running, then we start talking, and we go against facts and truths and whatnot, and then we're able to resolve. Many cases, 99% of the time, they have breached somewhere or the other, so it's genuine. But we also get the odd one where someone doesn't like you and they come and complain on you. But most of the times there's some breach, and we're able to work with them. The stop work is basically an instrument that helps these people rectify it, the breach, and then they get to continue to work, and it's lifted. The stop work is lifted and they work.
We'll talk about some other key environment issues when we come back in our final segment. Stay with us.
So this is our final segment, and I think we'd like to look at something that most people have, not to say forgotten about, but have just gotten on with the program. With the single-use plastic bag ban that got into effect as the 1st of January this year, we've moved on, and it's almost, say, about a quarter way into the year. Let's look at what the Ministry of Environment has done. Have you done any assessments? Have you done any tests? Have you kept track of how this particular ban has impacted the country, the people?
Sure. Look, I'm proud of what Fiji has achieved in this instance. A progressive economy like Fiji, which is forward-looking and being able to attract investors internationally, this is the right way to go. We are on one of the better compliant societies around the world. In terms of compliance, yes, after 2020 when it was launched. The ministry has a robust regime of compliance when it comes to making sure that it is being complied. In the last quarter alone, over 72 spot checks were made across the country, and also in terms of people moving on. What we have done is we wouldn't want it to just move on and people brush it aside and go back to the lifestyle that it was before 2020 in terms of using plastics. So we've closed the taps when it comes to plastics, the plastic ban being taken into effect, anything below 50 microns coming in. Or even if it's locally used, we stop them when we see it. And what we do is, the director was telling me earlier that they have what they call a red flag system. So if there has been non-compliance on a particular trader, that particular trader is red flagged, and when they're red flagged, there is another visit that the inspector pays. And personally, I'm aware of one such business which wasn't compliant, and after a few weeks, I'm told that they were followed up by another visit, but that time they were already compliant. They use equipments like tested calipers that can go measure the thickness of that. And so once they have done that, they're able to also use that opportunity as raise awareness. So we'll partner with the media, and media will know, but we don't say before we go, but these are spot checks that happen. We also do a bit of a behavioral analysis of compliance. So if there is a certain area, certain business, certain industry that struggles with compliance, then we focus our awareness on this plastic ban to that particular.
So that's interesting because we've heard reports, we've seen even ourselves that there are still people who are trying to abuse the system. They're trying to find loopholes, that they know that they cannot surcharge customers for these single-use plastic bags, and that they cannot issue them out either. However, they go under the table and they have dealings where they do sell not necessarily larger use single-use plastic bag, but even smaller ones. Now, of course, when it's a single-use plastic bag ban, that means anything that is below 50 microns, whether it's the size of my palm or as large as a table, it must not be in use at all or in trade. We see this happening. Is there any plans that the ministry might have to seize all leftover single-use plastic bags that are still with certain traders, while they may not be trading them and using them, just to confiscate and to just eliminate the problem itself?
Sure. So there are two issues here that you've brought up. One is what you said, as you've said, traders doing under the table dealing, and the other is perhaps the bags that have already been in circulation for decades, leading up to 2020 ban. So number one is that we have put in ground intel sources that tell us if there is a loophole or someone's trying to exploit it. And we also rely on consumers, we rely on media to bring it up to our notice. And if it comes to our notice, we have the system in place that goes immediately and bans them. And like I said earlier in one of your segments, we got trained prosecutors who, and right now, those people who have tried to exploit those loopholes, we have, what we've done is we've taken them as a breach. We are preparing case files, and we will prosecute them. We'll take them to court, and they will, with punitive measures will be taken, and if found guilty, they will be punished. So the department has a process, and it will follow by all means. And so the sources would be consumers, our ground intel, and of course if there's media who bring it up to a notice, and our own inspectors who go there from time to time to do spot checks. And so those that we have picked up, we will ensure that we will prepare case files and take them out. The other one is you were mentioning about still seeing litter, plastics below 50 microns. My explanation is again twofold. One is some of these are from the previous, I mean it's only 3 months since the ban went into place, so people still using those older bags and throwing them and disposing. That's one side. The other side is the irresponsibility of irresponsibly actually dumping them, not in the place where it should be. So to that extent, the ministry is about to launch, in partnership with the Ministry of Local Government, a plastic litter-free council or a plastic litter-free space, and award councils and towns and cities and also rural areas that do not litter or have a control, grasp over how these issues are and deal with them. So the criteria is being finalized, and we should be launching one soon, very soon. The other thing that I'd also like to mention is that the Ministry of Environment, Waterways and Environment has a strategic pathway in place, and the local government would then be able to have the operational collection side of it. One more thing that the Ministry of Waterways and Environment is doing is formalizing a collection network, which is already there in place, but enforcing it through the legal means and being able to ensure that the litter is not left there, or people who offend it have stricter fines. So we have trained now more than 400 trained litter prevention officers who go on the ground, and if they see, they immediately prosecute, and then it goes to court after that.
So we've reached the end of the show, but just very briefly, because I see a lot of ministries still struggling with this, with misinformation being circulated, especially on social media. What does the Ministry of Environment and Waterways plan to do with that, especially with mining and also with dredging issues?
Yeah. The ministry has a brand new website, which is fairly and reasonably up to date, and I would think up to date as of last week. And we also have a Facebook. The ministry has its own Facebook, where it is able to clarify issues, questions, and also the ministry is able to put out education awareness. The ministry has a budget to be able to have awareness and education sessions across communities. One of those things we are focusing is to have information out to the communities, being able to reach out and educate them and raise awareness, including establishment of community hubs and clubs to counter issues like coming out of mining and coming out of plastic ban and issues like that. So we will be able to closely follow and monitor and have our ears on the ground as to what is going wrong and be able to tackle that.
Mr. Wycliffe, thank you so much for taking your time out and coming to join us on our show today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And that's all we have time for you on the show tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening.